So there are three things in the budget that are confusing me that I want more elaboration on. I think I mentioned the first one, newspaper review, right? That the government said they spent 9.9 billion cedis on free SHS since inception. But that's exactly the same amount they spent on roads just January to June. And I'm wondering where the roads are. And I'm not being mischievous. I really want to know because I mean, 9.9 billion on free SHS since 2017, say from 2018 academic year, right? And you spend exactly the same thing on roads between January and June this year. So is it that 10 billion is small money, or there's something that's not adding up there for me? I need to break it down. Then number two, 5.4 billion cedis spent on 3 government interventions since January. Right? So LEAP, school feeding and capitation grant, and NHIS, four government programs, have taken half of what free SHS took, almost 5.4 billion, maybe a little bit of.
Yep.
Yeah. So LEAP, school feeding, capitation. I need a breakdown. I need a breakdown of that because 5.4 billion, and this is just from January. Again, it's a bit puzzling. So January, February, March, April, May, June, 5.4 billion cedis on LEAP. LEAP is the livelihood enhancement
Empowerment against poverty. Yeah.
School feeding program is for pre-secondary. So this is basic schools. Capitation grant is also basic schools. And then NHIS is for everybody. The numbers are, and then the last, this is paid 12 billion cedis to bondholders under the domestic debt exchange program. So this is haircut payments to people who payments were deferred. 12 billion cedis to bondholders. You know, but the 10 billion in the road sector since January 2024, I really need some elaboration on this.
Were some to pay debts, or they were for
they need to break it down. So that's a good question. So was it the road to build new roads, or to pay contractors who are old,
or maintain existing ones?
Yeah, you know, because that's this. I mean, you spend what we spend on free SHS for 9 years on roads in half a year, right? And a lot of roads are still not finished, right? So as we speak, Obenchi Lamte is not finished, Flower Pot is not finished, Accra Kumasi is not finished, Accra Winneba is not finished, PTC interchange is not finished. The only one that you can say is finished, the 2 big ones that are finished that you can say, Pokwasi interchange finished, and then the Tamale interchange also finished. But the Takrady interchange is not done. The Accra Kumasi is now a pain, even though they're doing it. Accra Cape Coast dualization is also not done. So, yeah, we need to. Well, I want to go behind the numbers. So what I'll do is I will speak to people in those sectors to explain to me what's going on. I'll speak to the Africa Education Watch on the education one, free SHS. If you spend 9.9 billion on 5.7 million people, what's the average amount per person? Why are parents still complaining that they spend a lot more money on their wards? Is it the middle class parents, everybody? You know, we need to look at some of those numbers closely. The other thing that I found in the budget that I was a bit disappointed was that the expenditure reduction only came from interest payments that we did not do because of the debt exchange. So it wasn't as if government actually cut expenditure on itself or on any project or anything. They just, because we negotiated with the Eurobond people, we negotiated with the bilateral people, we've saved some amount of money that we would have used. So if government says we are reducing our expenditure outlook, it's from deferred interest payments or interest payment savings.
Right.
Not necessarily because the government agreed that the expenditure was too high and they needed to cut. And I felt that they could have done better there.
Right. Yes, that's true, because over the past we've been told that they're going to reduce flights to only critical people. Fuel coupons were not going to be given any longer. Some announcements like that were given. So what kind of savings were made in that regard?
I get the impression, and I'll be wrong, I get the impression that the government, through the Minister of Finance, is saying that, we've gone through the worst, and therefore we can relax, but like things are getting better. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because the way I see some of the reliefs and the what was the word I want to use? So the it's not, windfall is not the right word. Like the reliefs we've gotten from the IMF and the debt exchange, some of them are substantive, but some of them are also basically deferring the pain. All right. So
as Tekpe was saying today.
so you see, one of the things is that if 2026 March, if we are still alive, we'll be here talking about the economy and what is going wrong with the economy, because we probably rejoiced too early in July 2024, right? Because we're saying we've gone through the worst, things are looking up, the economy is recovering. I thought they should have made more severe cuts in government expenditure on itself, right? All these travels that they travel. Look, there was a time they announced travel ban sky. Traveling is very expensive. The dollar is very expensive. So if you're going to travel and you even want to buy an air ticket for one person, imagine if you're going for a conference in, say, the US, and you send a delegation like 10 people from the ministry of whatever ministry, with the minister and the rest of them. It's very expensive, because how much is an air ticket for even a normal economy class, and then convert it to business class, and you do first class? So let's assume there are 8 officials from a ministry traveling, and maybe in every month 4 or 5 ministries have travels, government agencies travel. They all travel either business or first or whatever. Then you have to pay for their hotels. Then you have to give them per diem. You get it? It's a lot. And the other point about travel is also the loss, because a lot of the travels, in my view, when you travel, some of the work doesn't get done here. Okay, because Zoom has taught us that, Sky, before I actually travel, it must really be necessary.
Must be absolutely.
Because there are lots of things. I moderated a conference during COVID, which had people from like 50 countries.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in my office with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Minister of Lands was on. Some people were from some place, the whole world, and they were having a conference on Zoom. And we had the conference with Pepe.
Mm-hmm.
You get me? So a country that's going through a severe debt exchange and all those things should be able to say, until the economy properly recovers, only critical travel. So, for example, if Minister of Finance is going to China to negotiate about our bilateral debt agreement, that is justified. Mm-hmm. But even that, the number of people who should go should be very few.
So, Bernard, I have the expenditure control measures in the budget. I could just read that line
that
for
would
you.
Be
so
useful. That would be so useful.
How we've cut back on expenditure. So, point 86, it says, Mr. Speaker, the 2024 budget outlined a number of expenditure measures as part of the fiscal consolidation process. We have undertaken a stock-taking exercise and the prioritization of projects within the medium-term capital expenditure ceiling. We've initiated a blanket purchase agreement to fully capture multi-year commitments or contracts in the GIFMIS. Mm-hmm. We've streamlined and earmarked funds as part of the ongoing expenditure rationalization measures. Mm-hmm. Issued a circular to all covered entities on the implementation of the sanctions regime in respect of the non-compliance with PFM requirement. Mm-hmm. We've enrolled 856 procurement entities on the Ghana Electronic Procurement Systems. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Speaker, we will also enforce the Cabinet approved expenditure measure to reduce purchase of imports by public institutions by 50% mm-hmm. and purchase locally produced substitute. That's where it ends.
So these are good controls. So these are, you can lose money through when the system is very loose. So this GIFMIS thing and all the things we're reading are controls. What I'm talking about is the base. All right. So if you reduce your ministers by half, you don't pay them salary. So that's expenditure. Yeah. If you decide that you're not going to travel except it's critical, and that nobody's going to travel by first class, that's reduction in rate. You're going to pay any per diem. Do you understand me? Yeah. You're not going to employ new people in the public sector. Those are more substantive. So these are more administrative and accounting, financial control kind of things, which also are good. But I'm saying that we are not, again, I may be wrong, we are not being as aggressive on reducing the cost of running this government. And the way I see some of the reliefs, as Tekpe is saying, next year, next 2 years, we're going to have a very difficult time. Because now we've deferred a lot of our payments. When the payments get due, have we increased our revenues? I'm not sure. Right? So I don't think we should say Uhuru yet. You know, it's very tempting to want to say, you know, we are desperate for a good story, right? Because the negativity is not helping, the economy sentiment, error, blah, blah, blah. But there must also be a good dose of realism, right? And for a country that went through a very bitter debt exchange, where people were given haircuts, where you basically have to beg to defer your payments, there are lots of travel we should reduce. A lot of travel. Maybe they should. I would have been happier if he had come out to say, here are the specific cost-cutting measures we implemented in solidarity with the people of Ghana over their difficulty. Number one, we reduced all non-essential travel to its barest minimum. And the only travels that we had were A, B, C, D, X, and therefore we saved X billion cedis from travel cost savings. Number two, we rationalized the number of employees in government agencies from the president's staffers to etc., 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 etc. When we did that, we saved X amount. Number three, we monetized all the benefits of government salary workers or government appointees. So we gave them a basic salary to cater for their rent, and we stopped paying fuel coupons, stopped paying rent for them, and the amount we saved of this. Then ministers also took a salary cut of this, that. When we put all of that together, as government, we've saved 3 billion. Then you say, private sector, what are you also doing? TUC, what are you also, you see? But when you say give me something, these ones we don't know. It doesn't tell me much. So I really think that there should be more substantive expenditure cuts, and the fact that the expenditure cut is coming from deferred or saved interest payments is good, but I don't think it's enough. It's a long one. Good morning, team. All these stories are just window dressing. I'm afraid our public office holders are not ready for any rationalization of expenses to help curtail wastage in the system. It's pathetic when you work in the public sector and you have moral faculties working, and you have your moral faculties working. From local government to universities through to hospitals, everyone is looking for how to milk the system. Those who propagate ethical and professional values rather appear odd, and every measure will be put in place to cage you. Those charged with governance are worse. Can you imagine an university council approving a dollar-denominated salary top-up and other allowances for top-class office holders, even when the statute of the university, which should regulate the statute of the university, which should regulate universities' operations, are not in place? Can you imagine where on earth will a council have authority to give top-up salary to some officials when government, through fair wages, decides what those officers should receive? Long comment on that point. Let me talk to Kofi Asari of Africa Education Watch. So, big number. Government say we spent 9.9 billion cedis on free SHS since inception. Spent 1.5 billion cedis on 1.4 million students this year, January and June this year. Spent 5.4 billion cedis to support LEAP, school feeding, capitation, grants, and NHIs. Kofi, thanks for joining the program. Good morning.
Hi, Bernard. Good morning. Good morning to you all there.
Wonderful. So the big story for me was the amounts allocation for various things. Almost 10 billion cedis on free SHS since its inception. Now that figure looked big to me, but when I realized that it's the same 10 billion that was used on roads only this year. It didn't look that big. What are your thoughts around the amount spent on free SHS and whether that's giving us value?
I think it may not be big looking at the entire investment envelope of the government, especially comparing it to infrastructure or other big investment envelopes. But it is big if you compare it to the investment envelope for the pre-tertiary sector. Anytime you're analyzing this, you need to look at the sector in two parts, the tertiary sector and the pre-tertiary sector. The tertiary sector benefits from internally generated funds, which goes among others into investment. So a significant part of their goods and services budget goods and services budget is from where teaching and learning is actually financed. If you take out the cost of paying teachers, all the teaching and learning resources are financed from goods and services. So if you look at the tertiary goods and services budget, majority of their funding will come from their own internal budget fund. So there's no money available to be allocated for the entire sector. And so a better way to look at it is always to look at it from the pre-tertiary envelope. Now, how much do we have for goods and services under pre-tertiary? And that is between basic and secondary. I'm talking about KG, primary, junior high school, and secondary. And if you look at that envelope, you will come to the realization that the 10 billion, or the 10 billion we are talking about, is about 92% of the amount of money available for goods and services at the tertiary level. Note that the entire free senior high school budget is funded from the goods and services budget line. So if you look at it that way, you realize that all the money we have for teaching and learning resources, for buying of textbooks, all the money we have for intervention, all the money for the tertiary sector, including administrative grants to district education officers, regional education officers, and yes, money for running education. If you look at the entire group, the 10 billion you are referring to for the period 2017-2023 is about 90% of that money. And so if you look at it that way, then
Wow.
you appreciate that
So
there is a constraint.
if I get you right, only 10% of the amount spent on goods and services for pre-tertiary goes to KG, basic, and JSS. So 90% of all the goods and services money spent for pre-tertiary goes to free SHS.
Yes, it's not only basic, but then also the education officers, the junior education officers also included. They all share the 10%. Sometimes it actually is, for some years you are actually left with only about 6% to share. You understand? For example, in 2017, secondary had 23.3%, and then only 6.7% was left for sharing. In 2018, secondary had 96.8%, basic having only 3.2%. In 2019, secondary had 91.5%, and basic had 8.5%. So in 2020, secondary had 94%. And when I say secondary, I mean free senior high school took 94%, and basic had the remaining 5.6%. Now we saw a decline in 2022, 2023. By the end of 2023, 88.9% was going to secondary, and then basic and others were getting the 11.5%. Anytime I say basic, note that I'm talking about it's about basic education and also the interventions to DES, district, and regional and DES offices. So that's how the impact of that 10 billion manifests, at the tertiary sector.
Well, but Kofi, don't you think we should consider school feeding budget line and capitation grant as part of the pre-tertiary envelope that basic gets? Because it's pretty serious to say that only 10%, sometimes even less than 10% of the whole budget for pre-tertiary goes to basic. But capitation grant and school feeding are very much basic focused. So is it that they're on a different budget line, for which reason you don't add them to this analysis?
Capitation grant is part of the goods and services budget line I'm talking about. So the percentage you are seeing going to basic is mainly capitation grant and then support for BEC registration. And then also for basic, also feeding grants for special schools. So capitation grants are already part of this percentage I mentioned. But for school feeding, the African experience indicates that school feeding is not an education intervention, it's a social protection intervention. And so in many countries, you find that the Ministry of Social Protection is the one that implements the program. Yes, there's a school of thought that believes that the beneficiaries are from the education sector, and so it has to be ascribed to the education sector expenditure. I think the Minister of Education believes, is one of those who believe in that. It's something that can be done, but it has traditionally not been part of our budgeting system for the past 2 years. It has not been part of it. So if you are gauging education spending for tertiary, you are comparing, you will not be doing justice to it if you want to bring it in now. So it has not been part of the expenditure. The other expenditure lines also that benefit education that are not part of the education ministry's budget. For example, if a district assembly decides to build a school from its own internally limited fund, like Adenta is doing at the Adenta Community School, you will not find it in the Ministry of Education's budget because it is actually being financed from the local government resources. Even if the local government did not use their resources but got other support, from other TDM revenue or other sources, it will still not represent in the CAPEX budget of the Ministry of Education. But when the ministry is counting number of schools built in their on their MS platform, it will definitely be counted as one of the schools that government has built because that will include schools built by both national and then local government.
So this goods and services budget for basic schools, does it then cover things like exercise books, chalk, and that kind of thing? Because if
every teaching and learning resource is procured from it, it's mainly goods and services is mainly maintenance, maintenance, teaching and learning resources. Every consumable required to deliver education comes under goods and services. So it is only the salary of the teacher which is part of the compensation line. Mainly every consumable needed to run the school, run education, from buying of fuel, for monitoring of education by the education office, to maintenance work in schools, minor repairs of school infrastructure, resources to schools, capitation grants, feeding grants to special schools, all of these.
Kofi, that line seems small. So the question is the 10% looking small because we're comparing it to what has been invested in free SHS? So that if we had not put the 9 billion in free SHS, will the figure for goods and services for basic education have been higher? So is basic education suffering because of free SHS, or basic education allocation just looks smaller because free SHS has brought new money to give to secondary schools? Therefore, it looks like they are not giving the basic anything, which is the more, which is closer to reality.
Closer to reality, if you look at the share of goods and services of the education expenditure over the years, you realize that there's been an increase in the share of goods and services, the education expenditure, as a result of the introduction of the free senior high school policy. And so you can say that the free senior high school policy has increased the share of goods and services expenditure in education to a high of about 12% by 2022. I'm talking about the share of goods and services of about 18% in 2022. But you also have to acknowledge the other side of the coin, which virtually suggests that because we are having more and more of our funding for goods and services going into financing free senior high school, we've not been able to increase, for example, the amount of goods and services that goes to capitation grants. Okay, capitation grant has remained static at 10 cedis per pupil since 2018. If you compare the inflationary impact, that's about 170% or so impact of inflation. So the real value of that money is totally eroded. But we still have it at 10 cities. I'm not talking about disbursement. That's a different discussion. And so if we were not implementing free senior high school, or if we were not spending an average of 3 billion or 2.9 billion on free senior high school, it meant that we would have had more spaces to free up resources to increase all these allocations. Apart from that, if you look at the amount of money being spent in running district education offices, sometimes you have 20,000 Ghana cedis being allocated to one district education office. You understand? Just 20,000 Ghana cedis. That's 5,000 cedis a quarter. Then tell me, how much do you spend at your office in a month? Compare it to a district education office, which has the responsibility of monitoring, teaching, and learning in about 100 schools in a district. Consider the geography and then the cost. And you have an allocation of 20,000 Ghana cedis for the whole year as administrative expense. It is under the goods and services budget line. So obviously, no proper and again, we are not talking about disbursement. That's a different discussion. In some years like 2021, end of year, only one quarter is disbursement, 5,000 or had been released. So you find that some district education officers have their lights off the whole year, no light because they can't pay electricity. You find that some district education officers cannot afford fuel and stationery, and they are always at the mercy of NGOs. So it is because that space is constricted due to the dominance of the secondary education expenditure there. So there are various dimensions of the implications of having about an average of 90% of your goods and services at the line going to free senior high school. But again, I must say that free senior high school obviously increased the goods and services share of the education budget. But what does that mean? If you have free senior high school increasing the goods and education share of the education budget, look at the education budget. 70% goes into salary. So you have only 30% to distribute. That's non-discretionary. But if you are looking at it in terms of expenditure, you will realize that it's more than 70%. You will end up about 55% of your budget on salary.
All right.
So you have the remaining 20% on goods and services and capex. Now, what happens is that once you have majority of your money going to goods and services because of free senior high school, your majority of discretionary expenditure going to goods and services because of free senior high school. And the meaning is that you have very little money for capital investment, which is capex, which means you can only build a few schools. And that is why if you look at the trend in expenditure, education expenditure over the period, you realize that capital expenditure has hardly crossed 10%. It was as low as 6% in 2017, and it is at 10% by 2022. And the capex is the one that will build the school for you to go and teach. The capex is the infrastructure financing. So if you are doing only 10% on capex, it means that you are limiting your ability to build more schools to absorb the over 1 million out of school children between age 4 and age 16, according to the Ghana Statistics and all that. And so there's a huge implication not only for basic education in goods and services, but also for capital expenditure at the basic.
So you're saying free SHS has come at a cost. The two costs are quality of basic education will suffer as a consequence of relatively lower expenditure on goods and services. Number two, infrastructure will suffer because the capex has not grown in line with the increasing numbers. So yes, you spend 10 billion on free SHS in 8 years. That's a good thing. But the pipeline that brings them in, they may have a lower quality people even coming into the secondary school system. If can we translate the lower money in that to even mean lower quality at the basic level?
Definitely, if you have slow investment in basic education, especially in infrastructure and goods and services, you are obviously going to have declining quality, and then you're also going to have declining rate of increase in enrollment, and we are going to have more and more out of school children. 10 years ago, we had 500,000 out of school children. Now we have 1.4 out of school children. You understand? So that will obviously be the implication. But because at the basic level, our BEC, which is normally used to gauge performance, it's a standard system. It's actually non-referenced. You cannot determine. I mean, the pass rate is always the same. You always have a fixed pass rate under the non-reference standard operating system. So you can't compare and say that in this year before free senior high school, BC pass rate was higher and it's now lower and higher. So there's no way to immediately check that. And also the MST, which is now being used, is also a diagnostic tool. It wasn't done in the past, so it's not scientifically proper to compare MST today to the previous NEA or SEA or other, pilot testing. Because there are different tests conducted with different objectives, different methodologies, and all that. Assessment is all that. But once you are reducing or you are not increasing education investment at the basic level the way you should, it will have an impact on quality and access. And if you look at transition data, and I'm making an example of the North. If you look at transition data between primary and junior high school in the northern region, the 5 northern regions, you realize that you see the implication of declining investment because out of 10 students who enrolled in one in this part of the country, only 5 complete primary school and only 3 complete junior high school.
Sorry. Can you repeat that? You said in the northern zone.
In the northern region, okay, out of 10 who enroll in basic school, only 5 complete primary 6 and only 3 complete junior high school.
Wow.
So you lose 7. Yes. So the dropout rate, the cohort survival rate, the survival rate is only 30%.
Which means if we even take it to SHS, that's even worse because 10 start basic, maximum, 5 years. How many of them get to SSS 3?
The maximum that will enter will be 3 out of 10. That's the maximum. And if you go to some of the regions like Northeast and Savannah, they have the worst survival. And you're having this, variance compared to the national. What's the national system? Out of 10 who enter into basic school, 3.5. I mean, 6.5 right BEC. So the dropout is about 35%. So if you compare it to the traditional North, the dropout there is almost twice the national average, 70%. And one of the main reasons is the infrastructure gap, because in that part of the country, because communities are sparsely located, the lack of junior high schools in about half of the primary schools means that when you complete primary 6, you are doing a 10-kilometer journey to the nearest community with the next junior high school. We've not been able to provide every primary school with junior high schools in many parts of the country. In fact, in 25% of our primary schools, we've not been able to provide junior high schools there because of funding deficit in the CAPEX budget. So that is how, when you have one section of the tertiary sector consuming so much resources, it limits your ability to invest, to reduce dropout, enhance transition, so that many more children can progress and enjoy secondary.
So when you see this figure and then you consider the fact that we are spending money procuring almost 1 million tablets for secondary school students and then building STEM schools, you ask yourself whether it's data that's driving the decisions, because you've just told me that for every 10 people who start basic education in the North, only 3 get to SS1. And yet we are not, and you are saying that it's because of an infrastructure deficit. The schools are too far away. They can't walk to those schools. So they just stay home. So is this data public data? Is this data known by the ministry, or are you the one?
The data I'm referring to is the Ministry of Education's own data, and then UNICEF's EAGLE data. The ministry is aware. I mean, we did every year when you're going to write BC, we do a district analysis. We take one district to look at the enrollment. So this year, for instance, we just pick a district. You look at the enrollment 11 years back, and then you compare it to the number that's writing the BC, and then you see the trend, and then you know that the survival rate is very, very low, I must admit that the investment you are talking about, building STEM schools, providing ICT facilities for secondary school learners to participate in fourth national revolution, 21st century skill development, is very, very important. But you see, MasterCard, a leading investor in secondary education research, advises countries in their bid to approach to deploy free senior high school, free secondary education governments across Africa and South America and other parts of the world, that the journey towards free secondary education is very, very important to reduce the youth unemployment situation and help in the youth school to work transition, because there's a continent where unemployment is high, and it's mainly because of the gaps in the demand and supply of skills. And so we need to empower our youth to have labor market relevant skills so that they can have something to do at the secondary. So the reform at the secondary level is very important, not just because of access, but it will equip the young ones with pre-employment skills or the necessary skills to enter the world of work, to enter the labor market. However, MasterCard continues to remind governments that we have a continent where 20% of children are not in school. In Ghana, it's 10%, so it's better. But a continent where 20% of children are not in school. And the main reason why they are not in school is because governments have serious funding issues when it comes to infrastructure and teaching and learning resources. And so there are many underserved communities where there are no schools, reason why students are not going to school. And so if you have this situation, as you approach your secondary education reform, bear in mind that there is an unfinished agenda at the basic level. So the costing of your model should be such that you don't lose the universal basic education, universal basic education agenda. Other than that, you will have a situation where you are spending much on secondary education, because secondary education is 3 times expensive in countries like Ghana due to the body nature. And when you are doing that, you're spending less on basic education, and you might be losing the foundational war, which is the war against out of school children at the basic level. So it's a tricky thing. And that's why it's important to always adapt cost-efficient approaches in the secondary education reform, so that basic education does not suffer pride of place when it comes to investment in goods and services and capital aspect.
All right. My last question, Kofi, and thank you so much. So we have an election year, and both leading parties, they don't seem to. Nobody's going to cancel free SHS now, right? But I suspect at least there will be some review. How should the review be done from next year? Because when we heard Mr. Setekwe say that from 2026 we're going to have a lot of challenges in the economy because most of our payments will be due, and the moratorium on our debt payments would have expired. So the second year of the next administration, they will have a lot of payments due. Your oil production, where your free SHS money is coming from, for the past 3 years, if you look at the PIAC report, it's been dwindling. There have been no new oil investments at the upstream in the past 3.5 years. So chances are that the oil revenues are also going to go down. How do you suppose the review should be done? Do you have any ideas around? Because this is not sustainable. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't look like it's sustainable. How should we go about reviewing it? What are any ideas quickly on this?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see any of the parties doing any review. Having engaged the manifesto committees of the major parties, I don't see any review happening in the next 4 years. They are going to maintain it in the current form. And so that is one. In view of that, I want to see, because any review that will lead to cost reduction or cost efficiency on government budget and promotes equitable spending within the protected space, it's not a review for me. And so I don't see that happening from our engagement with the MPP manifesto committee and also the manifesto committee. So within that context, I see the only way out to be government increasing its its own expenditure to education beyond the current levels we are seeing. If you look at the expenditure trend, we are still not spending enough on education when it comes to our international commitment. And so there's space for us to increase we are doing less than 4% of our GDP. We are doing just about 3.5% of GDP to education. African average is about 5.2. And so we are below the African average when it comes to our GDP allocation to education. And so if we are walking our talk by spending in accordance with the international protocols we have acceded to commit at least 20% of public expenditure to education, then I think that we should be able to get some cash to support the deficit in financing basic education if that money does not find its way into the free senior high school again. I let me indicate that it's only in 2022 that we did about 4.9% education share of the GDP. In 2021 it was 3.9. It's been low, so there's room for improvement when it comes to the share of education of GDP, and also the public budget. If you look at the public budget, the highest was in 23%. In 2018, when we did 23%. By 2022, we're doing 18%. The average in the past 5-6 years has been 19%. So we can still we were doing about 25% in some years. We're doing about 9% of GDP to education in 2012 or so. I think it was about 9%. So there's still room for improvement. As the economy expands, we have been shrinking the percentage share of education of the budget and GDP. I think it should rather increase because the economy is expanding. If we do that and we feed a part of the increment to basic education, we should be able to solve this. At least we reinforce this funding on this particular quantum of funding for education. And that is why our call for a pre-tertiary education, our call for a legislative instrument for the Pre-Tertiary Education Act is very important. But if we had a legislative instrument for the pre-tertiary education law we currently have, which makes basic education free under Section 2 and makes secondary education free under Section 3, if we have an LI for that law, among others, the LI will dictate funding norms. That if 50% of your discretionary expenditure should go to basic, then it is in the LI. If 25% should go to secondary, it's in the LI. So that when increments in education share of the national budget and GDP are made, it doesn't become the case that the increment finds its way into secondary education again. So for me, the way out is to increase our investment in education and then ensure that at least we commit 35% of infrastructure financing under debt fund to basic education. About a third of that money goes to basic education consistently for 5 years, we are going to see a significant reduction in the infrastructure deficit at the basic level. And also if we commit even 20% of the books and services budget line to both basic and the other sectors, if secondary education gets 80 and basic gets 20, that means that we will be able to increase capitation grants to realistic levels at present, and then also we'll be able to provide other learning resources to enhance the quality of basic education. For compensation, we are doing very, very fine. We are one of the African countries not just spending, but having the highest number or the lowest teacher deficit situation. This year we are recruiting about 12,000 already, and we should. I know that by the end of the year, there are plans to get another 5,000 on board. We have more teachers than we need statistically. Our issue is distribution. So we are spending a lot already on compensation. So the main areas to improve in financing are the goods and services and then the capital expenditure line.
Thank you very much, Kofi Asare, for Africa Education Watch Executive Director. Really, really sobering numbers. So basically, the big number is 9.9 billion on 5.7 million students over the past 7 years. But that's really not the real point. The point is you have that's 90% of the goods and service expenditure.
Yeah.
And that means that the pre-tertiary. That means that pre-tertiary, free SHS swallows up the whole thing.
Yeah.
So basic education, whether it's buying textbooks or whatever, chalk or whatever, they get only 10%. Some instances they get 9%. And the other point is that this 9.9 billion is allocation. Allocation is not the same as disbursement. So you can say we've allocated an amount.
But whether you've actually disbursed that for...
Whether you've disbursed it on time. Said that for a district you get 20,000 cedis per year for goods and services. Now that's 5,000 per quarter. What will you do 5,000 cedis per quarter for a whole district? Okay, so there are many challenges with... The numbers hide some bigger issues. Then he also spoke about the dropout rate.
Yes, the completion rate.
Yeah, so he says the free SHS expenditure causes 2 problems. The first problem is the lower allocation for basic education in goods and services. And the second one is the lower allocation for capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Because free SHS is recurrent expenditure. Now he's saying because of the large distances between secondary schools in the north, JSSs particularly, when somebody goes to grade 1 to 6 in a school near his village, if he gets to class 6 and has to go to GSS 1, the next school may be 10 kilometers away and he may not be able to afford to go because it's not a boarding school. So we need to build more schools in the north and other places because the dropout rate in the north is almost double that of the whole country. Again, the statistics hide that. The prioritization for government, I interviewed Okonjo. Sorry, I interviewed Obi Ezekwesili, and she was talking about how politicians and governments do things that they can easily say we've done outputs without looking at outcomes. The outcome is really whether learning is taking place. And even on this hardcore issue of lack of infrastructure, it means that people are not going to school because there aren't enough schools near where they live.
Yes.
It's very sobering.
A few weeks ago, I remember we were discussing it. There was a school, if you remember, just in Accra, and the school it was in a very horrible shape.
Even in Accra.
There was the Sempe school, and then you had, I think it was Neo Tinto.
Yeah.
But you see,
speaking,
even with the Sempe school, not to catch you, there are a few schools around. Imagine a school in the northeast or some other region.
Huge area,
or a community with no school.
You are. I'm just saying that. Think about it. So if in the big city there's this challenge, you can just imagine what's happening up north. We have colleague journalists in other media houses who by themselves are soliciting for funds to buy desks, chalk, exercise books for deprived schools in places. And you can't even call those places where these children learn schools or structures. They're just very decrepit. It's just really, really sad. So every time, and Godfrey talks about this all the time, we say a lot about free SHS and the money we are pumping there. But we also need to take a second look at the basic level and see that a lot is happening there. Not a lot of attention is going there. And we are seeing it play out in different ways. And I'm very happy we've spoken to Kofi Asad because he paints the picture very, very clearly for all of us to see that this over-fixation on the free SHS, we are doing it and we are turning our eyes away from basic and the big problems that exist at that very important stage.
The other point that came to me is, so let's even assume you are allocating and spending, and again, we are not saying they shouldn't spend money on free SHS. I even think they should spend more if they have to. If you spend 10 billion cedis on say 6 million students, right? So you basically spend about 18 cedis per student, if my calculation is right. All right, because you have say 10 billion and you divide that by say 5.7 million. Okay. Now, how much do you spend per public sector officer in a year? Right. So if you want to invest in your future as a country and you want to really bring education to the people, maybe we should start distilling these budgets into those kinds of numbers, right? Because the way the budget is structured, you can't really, you will not see our spending priority until you go into such numbers to say, okay, even if you spend 10 billion on 6 million students, how much per student versus how much you spend per director, how much you spend per minister, how much you spend per MP, how much you spend, and that will include their pay, their allowance, their everything, their car. Because if you want something to grow, you must spend more quality on it. All right. So just announcing we spend X amount on this, X amount on that, it doesn't really tell us the priority until we break it down into per capita, per unit expenditure. And I argue that there's a lot of cuts that should be made at the high levels of government, because that's where the wastage is. That's where there's all kinds of things being spent. Look, there are government agencies which are not even minister-led. So like government agency that's making a loss. All right, whether it's Cocoa Board or SNIT or whatever, you should look at TOR. You should look at how much it costs to maintain the people in those organizations.
Yeah.
Look, when we look at the state ownership report, most of these government entities were making losses. In fact, we have SOEs that are making losses like crazy. Check out the number of people who are employed in those places.
Yeah.
Check out how many times they travel. Check out how much they spend per travel, how many cars they drive. If you're really serious about solving a development problem, you have to present the statistics in a way that makes sense to me, to say, look, we've reduced how much you spend on one politician or public sector head by X%, and we've translated that into spending on school kids,
teachers, infrastructure.
Okay? So it should not be enough to simply come and announce 5.4 billion on LEAP, 12 billion, this, 10 billion. No, we have passed that stage, because now we have to measure your priority by your per capita allocation. Yeah. And Kofi spoke about that, the percentage of the budget spent on education totally, but even on which parts? Teaching, is it infrastructure? Is it just buying food? We have to be more granular. Otherwise, we will never get any insight from these budgets, and it just becomes another politics, which is why it's not a surprise that the debate, they've not even started a debate. They were even debating whether to debate it, which I found quite funny. They were debating whether to even debate it. Like, there has to be, one of the ways we fail Ghanaians is in the public discourse, we never really focus on the real issues.
Yeah.
Because the real issue is not just, they have spent more than, we've done better than NDC, we've done better than NPP. The real issue is, how are these monies changing the face of education or health, empowering our kids to be better equipped for the future, making them ready to be able to face the kind of future that is being heard. That's where I don't see the numbers in the way they're presented don't make that much impact for me. By the way, you've been following some stories on these sectors, the school feeding program, the capitation grant. Anything to report?
Bernard, just to mention that if you look at the basic school level, we have had 5,400 schools under trees, sheds, and dilapidated structures.
Still
5,400, yes. And the government announced in 2021 that it had plans to replace all these with proper structures. Star Ghana, Africa Education Watch, and other civil societies in the education space have made us understand that only 17 schools have been built at the basic level. And per their calculation, it will take us some 300 years to replace all 5,400
You gotta
schools.
be kidding me.
Yeah, so schools under trees, schools that are under sheds, and those that are in dilapidated structures, 5,400. We've not even talked about
of what year?
furniture.
As of what year?
Yeah, this report was released last year.
5,400
schools
under
trees, sheds, or in dilapidated structures. And we've not talked about furniture. We've not talked about teaching materials. So when Kofi Asare talks about the fact that 90% of our budget is actually going to goods and services, that's a very serious concern. And then the basic school then is also bearing the brand. So it looks like a lot of attention has gone into the senior high school program, which is great. But the basics that actually prepares them from the SHS, that we have sort of neglected. So more attention needs to be paid to basic school, which is very important here. With the capitation grant, we've seen that the very recent thing that has come up here is the release of 20 million Ghana cedis to settle the arrears. Okay. So it's often very much in arrears all the time. And the most recent time this came up was December last year, 2022. And the minister had announced that capitation grant had been released across the country. But again, as Kofi made us understand, some schools are given 20,000 cedis to run things. And so these may not necessarily be enough. But Bernard, when we brought this when you asked about the amount spent on the free SHS in the education in the last free SHS, yes, in the last 7 years, and compared to roads that we've spent like 10 billion in just
6
half
months
of this year.
Yeah.
Actually, remember that the sector minister former revealed that 1 kilometer of asphalt road cost us 1.5 million.
cedis.
Yes. So if you break it down,
1
kilometer
of an asphalted road.
is costing 1.5 million.
Serious?
Yes. So if you work the numbers and put it together and you divide that by the 9 billion we are
can do that.
seeing.
So if 1 kilometer is 1.5 million cedis,
Yes.
then 10 billion.
Yes.
Divided by.
This one I can easily do. It's ratio and proportion, right?
Yeah.
So how many kilometers of asphalted road will 10 billion cedis give you? So it's 1 kilometer is to 1.
I think you have 6,000, somewhere between
6,000.
600. Yes.
You think you're sure? I've forgotten my
I'm
calculation.
doing 10 billion by 1.5 million, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it will give you 6,000 kilometers
Yes.
of roads. But do we have 6,000 kilometers of road done? Okay, let me look at the roads that have been done. Of course,
There's a list,
this is a simplistic calculation because,
Yeah.
of course, some of this is road clearing, some of this is
Some of it is-
asphalting.
others
But
are-
Some of it is
if you look at
tires,
even the
roads
roads
and
and
all of that.
highways, the roads he mentions, Accra Kumasi Road,
Yeah.
that's less than 300 kilometers, right? 250. So if you also town roads, we don't know how many. Nanton Karaga Gushewu Highway, Tolon Daboya Road, Gushewu Town, Karaga Town Road, Winneba Kasua, and Joabeso Boenzan.
Yeah.
Then there's also completed road project at DSO Esiachim Menchia, J. Krum Debra Camp, Sunyani and Brekum Inner City, Atebubu Town, Asim Fosu Dunkwa Koko Station, Kwehu Tafo. And then, but the major road projects, to be fair, the rehabilitation of Tatale Road, phase 2 of Temamoto Roundabout, that's very slow. Construction of flyover over the Accra Temamoto Way,
That's also
slow.
slow.
Yeah, from the flower pot to Spintex, still going on slowly. Phase 2 of the Suami interchange, not done. Dualization of Salmo Fanko, also slowly but progressing steadily. Agona Nkwantatakwa. Honestly, if that calculation is true, we need more evidence of the 10 billion because this is just in 6 months.
Yeah. So half of this year, 10 billion
Yeah,
for
so
roads.
how much have they spent in the past 4 years on roads? It's not in the budget. We can calculate that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many of those roads have actually been done? So that will require,
Yeah.
you know,
A bit
our
more
going there
follow-up.
to
Yes,
see
a
the
bit more
state of
follow-up.
the roads and all.
And then the nuance here also could be that in constructing some of the roads, when there are delays and contractors stop, like if you take the Ketase Brekusu Road, by the time they go back, the road has deteriorated a
Yeah,
bit
so
more,
they have
and
to
they have to
redo-
redo what they've done already. So
You're right,
the
you're
actual cost of the roads, we
Yeah.
really need to get
Yeah,
to know
yeah.
and drill
You know,
down to some of
public
these
finance
things.
has to be more transparent and more. We need to place the microscope better on public finance because some of these numbers are very hard to believe. $1.5 million or cedis per
1
kilometer
kilometer.
of road. So if you spend 10 billion in 6 months on roads,
Yeah.
people need to see the roads, man. It's 9:14. We are listening to See the Breakfast Show. Send us your comments 054-998-6996. We're talking to Kofi Asari on free SHS as one expenditure item. 10 billion in 7 years on 5.7 million people. What's the effect of that? We spend the same amount on roads half year. Where are the roads? We spent 5.4 billion cedis on 4 social interventions: LEAP, school feeding, capitation, and NHIS. What's the effect? All of these and more on discussion.
Bernard, the other thing is when they mention the amounts spent to help SMEs, you know. And
What amount do they mention? That's not in the budget. They mentioned that, you know, a lot of those are mentioned with government partnered programs.
Yes, it's usually
So it will be maybe a MasterCard Foundation, something. But it's a big.
5.4 billion. Okay, this is
different.
Yeah, so SME will come up shortly. I'll get that
We need
quickly.
to find SME because there's a lot of SME. Even this week, the president said some X number of people have been employed in SME and number of people.
and
We need to track that.
yes,
You know?
because you see they they seem to be at variance, for example, with numbers put out by the statistical service. Right, when you look at the unemployment numbers put out by the statistical service and government's huge astronomical numbers in terms of job creation. We've created X number of jobs, and yet when the statisticians work the numbers, you realize that there's a massive difference that we all struggle to account for. You know, just recently, what the statistical service said concerning, was it 2 million young people?
Yes, 2 million.
Not employed, not in training, not in school. So when you take,
not in education, employment, or training,
you know, when you take that and take government's numbers and you smash them together,
there's something
you realize
missing.
there's something that's something that doesn't, something is not sitting well. So like I said, we will have to probe a lot more,
because a lot of the you know, it's not one funding source. So there are NEIP is doing something, youth authority is doing something.
but are they speaking to each other? Are they coordinating?
That's a very good question. Because what I'm saying is that, like, they announced NEIP doing one, youth authority, and even there's a third one, Kosi Yankees one, Ghana Employment Agency.
Yes, Ghana Employment Agency.
Then they call Ghana Cares or Batampa something, like
That
all
came
kinds of
up
things.
with
So
it.
there's no, I don't know how to put it. You can't track it well.
Yes.
Because there are different things happening, and a lot of these people who say they benefit as well, some of them even cross benefit.
Yeah.
Because they are experts.
Yeah.
You know, I know people who are very good at getting money from youth training programs because they've mastered the way of applying for them.
Yes.
Meanwhile, there are communities where there are young people who have
Yes.
great ideas and who get
And
help.
they are
Yeah,
not
so
getting
the minister said the government committed an amount of 8.2 billion Ghana cedis to boost small and medium-sized enterprises in the country.
8.2
billion Ghana
over which
cedis.
period?
Uh,
8.2 billion Ghana
yes.
cedis to boost.
committed 8.2 billion Ghana
Okay,
cedis.
so-
But the word is committed.
Yes, committed, and I don't know what that means.
So
What that
for which
means
period?
Depends
So if we
it's-
know the period, then we can ask
There's a lot of questions that need to be
who
answered here.
were these monies committed to?
And over what period were they
Over
paid, if they
you
were
know,
paid at all?
Yes. And then we can find out if people benefited, because you speak
Yeah.
to lots of SMEs and they
Yeah.
are still telling you that
Exactly.
they are struggling to get seed fund, they are struggling to get financial support, they can't get access to loans.
So Bernard, these are his words, right? The government has committed an amount of 8.2 billion Ghana cedis to boost small and medium-sized enterprises in the country. I am happy to announce on 16th July 2024, President Akufo-Addo launched the SME Growth and Opportunity Program, SME Go, to connect SMEs with resources, expertise, and opportunities. Altogether, we have mobilized about 8.2 billion Ghana cedis through DBG, Ghana Exim Bank, GEA, and other partners for SME to grow and increase competitiveness in the regional markets.
They should publish the list of SMEs benefiting from this. 8.2 billion is a lot of
Yes.
money. Now, these people who have benefited, I'm sure they have names, right? Even if it's a training you did or money you give them, there has to be more.
Impact stories from these.
Yes. We need to see. We need to. If you spend if I spend 8 billion on something, I'll probably have adverts on TV talking about the people who've benefited and what they've done. So we are urging the DBG and whoever has been part of this to come out and tell us where the people are, and some of the beneficiaries also let us know.
Yeah.
Because 8 billion is a lot of money.
8 billion. When you spend time with some of the players in the SME sector, they tell you that they struggle to access some of these funds that are often talked about in the media, right? So for a lot of them, it's a very distant thing, and then also the system is also very tough.
Yeah.
So whereas money is being mentioned in the press by our leaders that X was spent on SMEs, I mean, we know the SMEs, we know their story, we know their struggles.
They
And
should
so
come out
if some
and-
of this is injected into their businesses, we will get to see
The
it. as well.
beneficiaries
So
should
we
let
want
us
to
know
see.
if they have benefited. It's 9:20. Let's bring a few quick announcements and then we'll take your comments. 054-9986-996. We're taking the budget from a different angle, looking at some of the numbers, big numbers, and as they call it, behind the numbers, what are the real stories? There's a long one from Dr. Clement Akpak, who is listening to the show, and he's the ranking member on the Education Committee. I think he's the deputy ranking on the committee. And he is commenting on free SHS. Mr. Bernard, I listened to your interview, Kofi, and he is right. As a rural MP and a member of the Education Committee, I can confirm what he has said with regards to basic education. What is also sobering is that with the 9.9 billion spent on free SHS, the implementation challenges don't seem to go away. This raises questions about how these funds are used. I have over the years asked for an annual breakdown of the expenditure on free SHS. For example, how much goes to food, boarding, library, fees, exam, etc. By the way, government owes various free SHS suppliers tablets, food, uniform, supports. Government owes various free SHS suppliers tablets, food,
medicine or
uniform, sports apparel, etc. Well, this figure was disputed. I remember there was a claim by Peter Notukoche that government owes suppliers 6 billion. The government came out and said they did not owe. We don't know how to confirm this because the suppliers are not known to us in totality and we don't have the full amount. But Dr. Apak is repeating this. He says free SHS is good, but focusing on free SHS ostensibly to the detriment of basic education is not good. We cannot purport to build a structure, secondary, and a superstructure, tertiary, on a weak and collapsing foundation, basic. It does not make sense. There must be equity in funding all the tiers of education. However, if I have a choice, basic education should get more funding compared to secondary and tertiary. This is Dr. Clement Apak texting us into the show this morning.
You see, I mean, if Parliament was up to its task, I mean, if they themselves would have sanctioned an audit of some kind into or to review the free SHS policy. And it will be bipartisan. It will not be a question of whether this person introduced it or that person introduced it. Because 20 years from now, 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, we'll begin to feel the full force of this particular policy, the positives of it and the negatives of it. And Parliament is the institution voting the money for these things to be done. So the question is, yes, do they just sit down there for government to come and tell them that, oh, this is what we have achieved? Are they not listening to what the people of their various constituencies are saying? And is it not possible to, lead some campaign and get the House to sit down and properly hear all the sides to this particular matter and come out with a credible report?
Very important.
That all of us will say, oh, this one, it will be the way forward. I think we should look at it that way.
Very important. Let's read another comment.
Bernard, please, this issue of having saved or cut down expenditure just by deferring payments to future is sickening. Cocoa Board, that has been making losses all these past 6 years, just jumped to say they have now made profit because of renegotiated debt. Are these not false profits and expenditure cuts? The minister and government must take us seriously. Michael from Legon send that through.
Cocoa Board has had the lowest output in years, and yet they are reporting a profit, as you said. So that the point around profit is, I never use profit for anything. Profit is not really how much cash do you have. Profit can be operational, it can be net. You can decide to make a certain kind of profit based on how you describe your costs. But the real issue is, do you have cash, right? And that question doesn't seem to be answered because almost all our state-owned enterprises are cash strapped.
So let me ask you a basic question. Are we in a good place as an economy presently?
Oh, no, we are not.
We are not.
At all. We are in a better place compared to December 2022. But we are not in a good place.
And are we turning the corner?
That's somebody's description of what he wants to describe the economy. As I say, if you have a 5-year view of the economy, we are still in a crisis. If you have a 5-year view of the economy, we are not out. We've negotiated some debt things. We have some relief. But structural things have to be done. Things have to be done on government expenditure to really free up spaces are not being done. Tax revenues as well. People are tired. You give too many tax exemptions. So if you want my candid answer, we are not out of the woods. We're not. We are not.
It's sad.
We're not out of the woods. And I mean, anybody can come out and give me numbers. But, well, you see, the way you can describe it in a way as a relative thing. All right, so 2022, cedi was depreciating a lot, kicked out of the international capital markets. So everything was in disarray. All right. So things have stabilized. That I can't lie. There's been stabilization. But what you want beyond stabilization is growth and development and transformation. And on that score, we have not yet there. We are not.
So, Bernard, it was sad hearing Kofi also answer your final question in the negative to say that he doesn't see any of the governments committed to reviewing the free SHS. Because, I mean, if you are spending 90% of almost 10 billion on goods and services, and we are saying that capital expenditure, we are not spending much there, which is one of the focus. You have 5,400 schools under tree sheds and the dilapidated structures. Why don't we take a second look at this so that those who really can afford pay for their wards, so that we release some of the funds and invest into infrastructure? Because the thing is, parents can provide some things for their wards to go to school, but they cannot go and build schools for their wards to go to school. That would be some philanthropist who will come from abroad or who is here will try and put together an old school. But I think that if we look at the measures and realize that no, we are having more people go to school now, but the infrastructure is not meeting the demands and the quality is going down. That's where, because they say an unexamined life is not worth.
The problem is, because free SHS has become politicized, review would be to make sure it's more sustainable and the funding is sustainable.
That's the idea.
But his point is that if you look at the body language of the two leading political parties,
committed to that.
He doesn't see how they will even do a proper review. So they may come up with one or two tweaks, but it will definitely be the same thing.
That is why I made the point about Parliament. And also, Bernard, beyond Parliament, you have the National Development Planning Commission there. Their job is to plan how we will get this country to realize the full effect of what the dreamers, the framers of this country thought of when they were setting it up.
Okay.
And they are to do that devoid of partisanship or who appointed you into your office, because it is an independent commission. These are some of the things they should be looking at. To do a proper review of, oh yes, we say we want to develop 40 years from now. The people we are producing from the free SHS, are they capable of providing the kind of leadership 40 years from now to get us to the promised land?
Good question. Quick correction. So again, people kept saying that the Accra-Winneba Road is not a government project, and I need to correct that. So I'm being told that that project is a government of Ghana project. So I'm told that Accra-Winneba Road is undertaken by the Ghanaian government, not ECOWAS, and that it involves the dualization of the 34-kilometer road from Kaswa to Winneba Junction to ease traffic congestion, improve travel time, and address road safety concerns. Now, funding. The project is funded by the Ghanaian government. The Ghanaian government, with an estimated cost of $85.3 million US. Contractors are NAG Fairmont Company and Delivery Company. The project is expected to be completed within 36 months, with significant portions to be opened to traffic before the end of 2024. So this is the update. So those of you who've been texting saying the Accra-Winneba Road is not a government of Ghana road, the ministry says it is, and they have the amount is 80, upwards of $80 million.
I think they're confusing the fact that it's labeled an ECOWAS trans highway. With
well, they were insisting. Well, it's good. I got this. So thank you for sending that in. My contact from the Ministry of Roads